Hello friends, my name is Roisin and welcome back to my channel. So in December I read the Goodreads Choice Awards historical fiction, which I will leave linked in the cards above if you haven't seen that vlog yet. But whilst I was reading that, I noticed that 9 out of 10 of the authors who were shortlisted were American authors, because Goodreads is very much American centric. So I thought it might be interesting to try and read some of the best books that UK readers like. What Waterstones considers to be the best-selling historical fiction of 2021. Now, to be perfectly honest, I have filmed this clip before, like a week ago, but when transferring clips to my laptop for editing, I managed to delete this clip. So we are doing it again, which means that I am not going on what is live on Waterstone's website as the best-selling right now. I am going to watch the screen recording that I did a week ago and comment on it for you. So I went onto the Waterstone's website. So to find the best-selling, I went to books, and then fiction, and then fiction again, and fiction bestsellers. Now I went into the category of historical fiction, and now it says at the top here, it says our best historical fiction. So I think this is what is best-selling, but I don't know if actually they weed things out. Now I am planning to only read things that are not in a series and were published in 2021. I'm not going to be reading any backlist books, and I'm not going to be reading any sequels. I will read the first book in a series if that comes up, but it's just unfair to read a sequel to a book that I haven't read the first book for. I don't know if you can hear that dog barking incessantly outside. I apologise if you can. The first one is The Song of Achilles, which I actually did a reading vlog for recently. It's up there, but that wasn't out this year. The second one is Ariadne by Jennifer Saint, which I'm pretty sure did come out in 2021. So Ariadne by Jennifer Saint will be one of the books that I am reading, and that's here twice. And then there is also The Woman of Troy by Pat Barker. I know that this is like a companion piece to The Silence of the Girls, but I don't know if it is like a sequel, and so you have to have read The Silence of the Girls first, or if it is more like it's in the same world, but if you haven't read the first one, that's fine. I think it probably will be fine because I have a classical degree. I have a classics degree, so I know the story. So I'm going to put Pat Barker on there. Then we have The Song of Achilles again, The Promise by Damon Galgut, my second favourite book of the year. My favourites will be up in the corner if you are interested. So I have read that one. I really loved it. Then we have Hamnet, that didn't come out last year. Circe didn't come out last year either. I liked Circe. I liked Hamnet. I haven't read Circe. I read The Manning Tree Witches. I like that one. Small Pleasures came out 2020, I believe. Colm Toibin, The Magician, and The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper. So Colm, I think The Magician came out last year. Yeah, 2021 it says there, so that one did come out last year. And then we have The Wolf Den as well. I'm pretty sure that did come out in 2021 also. Yeah, that one did also come out in 2021, and that one's about Pompeii. So The Magician is about Thomas Mann, who was a historical fiction writer, which is interesting. So we have Ariadne by Jennifer Saint, The Women of Troy, and The Magician, and then I might also read The Wolf Den as well, because I was interested in reading that one before. But what is interesting there is you've got 3 of those books, Ariadne, The Women of Troy, and The Wolf Den, which are all set in classical antiquity. I have a classics degree, and the other book that I've read so far this year is The Song of Achilles. So it's probably a good thing that I'm going to have to read The Magician, because that is the only one that is not set in classical antiquity. But yeah, so that is an interesting selection of books there. 4 books I'm going to be reading this week is Ariadne by Jennifer Saint, which is a retelling of the myth of Ariadne. The Women of Troy by Pat Barker. I loved Regeneration by Pat Barker, and this is the story of the women from Troy, the Trojan women, after the fall of Troy. Then we have The Magician by Colm Toibin, which, like I said, is about Thomas Mann, who wrote historical fiction, a German historical fiction writer in the early 20th century who had to flee the Nazis. And then the 4th one there is The Wolf Den, which is about a brothel in Pompeii. So those are the 4 books I'm going to be reading over the course of this vlog. I hope you enjoy them. Hello, so I now have the books that I saw were on the list. I have of the best-selling historical fiction. I have two of them in physical copy anyway. So I have Colm Toibin, The Magician. When the Great War breaks out in 1914, Thomas Mann is fired up with patriotism. He imagines the Germany of great literature and music, which had drawn him away from the stifling conservative town of his childhood, might be a source of pride once again. But his flawed vision will form the beginning of a dark and complex relationship with his homeland. Now, I've never read anything by Thomas Mann. I'm not hugely familiar with him as a writer, so maybe this will be a jumping off point. I also have a physical copy of The Women of Troy. Now, this one I feel like I'll be much more familiar with the story. Now, I imagine this will be a lot to do with the Trojan women, which is played by Euripides. I'm going to put Sophocles here if it was Sophocles, but I think it was Euripides. And I imagine it will be a lot about the theme of what happens to women in a society like Greece, a military society, as after the war is over, when you take these women as slaves. So it is, as I said, a continuation of The Silence of the Girls, but I do think that it can be read alone because I haven't read The Silence of the Girls yet, but I know the story. So because this is set in Troy, which is in Turkey, I thought I'd make myself some Turkish eggs this morning. Actually, I just had a lot of natural yogurt to use up, which is why I did that. But I think I'm going to start with The Women of Troy for my physical book. The physical book I couldn't get a hold of is Ariadne, which is kind of disappointing because that was the top one, so I feel like I need to read it. It's also one that the reviews I've heard have been kind of hit or miss of, so we'll have to see how I feel about it. I'm imagining it's following the story of Ariadne, who was the daughter of Midas and the sister of the Minotaur, and she helps Theseus with the red thread to get him out, and then he abandons her, and then she ends up married to Dionysus. That's just a brief potted summary of the history of the myth of Ariadne, but I don't know how much of that story is going to be told in the book. And then the other one, which I have actually started, is the Wolf Den, which is the story of a Greek woman who has been enslaved as a sex worker in Pompeii. But I don't know when. I don't know if Vesuvius is going to be a part of this or if we're just following Pompeii. So far there's been a lot of use of Roman sources. At the start of each chapter we have a section of a Roman source talking about prostitution, and then also a lot of use of graffiti. It's not my favourite. The writing is not my favourite. It's fine. Odd. I mean, I know it can be difficult to decide how to write about a historical time period because you want it to be accessible for a modern audience. It's not in Latin, so how of the time does it have to feel? But it does all feel super modern, and just not with any lyricism or flair to the writing. It's very simple and straightforward, and the characters are a bit like stock characters. Right now I'm about to go swimming, so I'm not going to take you with me there because you don't need to see that, and the other people in the swimming pool probably don't want you to see them, so I'm just going to go out and do that, but hopefully I'll read more and come back to you a bit later. Hello, so I've come back from my swim, and the lighting is awful, isn't it? If I put my light over here, is that a bit better? That's a bit better. I've just been for a swim, but what I do have is book post. It was also new cardigan post. Okay, well my camera died and I can't be bothered to sort it out. Bothered to wait for the camera to charge to open these parcels. I want them open now, so I'm going to open the parcels on this camera, my phone. Bit of an awkward angle, but there we go. Yes, I got this in the sale. I don't normally buy clothes first hand. I normally only buy things on Depop or in charity shops, but this was an Instagram ad that got me, and I feel really cute. And also, coming out of swimming and putting on a cute cardigan makes me feel like Tom Daly. Anyway, so I've got some posts that I bought myself and posts that the publisher sent, so we're going to open this and see what we've got, because I have a very bad memory for what I've spent my money on and what I've requested from publishers. Broth, bowls and broths, which I talked about in my Cumbria my vlog from when we went to the Cumbria over Christmas, which I will leave up there. This is a cookbook, East Asian inspired food, noodles and things that come in bowls, I guess, and broths of things, and some dumplings as well, dumplings and wrappers. Looks delish. Very exciting. Love a cookbook. And then the other thing, right, so on Instagram, there was this whole 12 books recommended by friends thing. I ended up only getting 11 recommendations, but one of them was from my friend Amy, who I know in real life and have known since I was 11, and she recommended Lean, Fall, Stand by John McGregor. When I was buying the broth book, it was on sale and it was like right there on the front of the thing, so I ended up buying it. I don't know very much about it. Maggie O'Farrell, Jarvis Cocker, Paula Hawkins, David Nichols, Max Porter and Alex Preston all liked it. Antarctic Research Expedition. Interesting. I love books set in isolated locations. This one's from Europa Editions. This one is from a Filipino author, The Betrayed. I talked about it in my anticipated releases. Set in the time of the dictatorship and political upheaval in the Philippines. It tells the story of two sisters who love the same man. Their passion threatens to lead them astray, lead them to betray not only each other, but all that their father stood for. And this is out on the 10th of February. I didn't realise how chunky it was, but still, super excited for that. The other one that I have is from Serpent's Tail. This is Harrow by Joy Williams. I love this cover. I'm not usually an orange fan, generally speaking, but I'm enjoying this one. Kristen's mother believes she was marked for greatness as a baby when she died for a moment and then came back to life. But Kristen's true destiny is far stranger and more complex. After Kristen boarding school closes its doors and she finds that her mother has disappeared, she ranges across the dead landscape and washes up at a resort on the shores of a mysterious putrid lake the elderly residents called Big Girl. In a rotting honeycomb of rooms, these old ones plot actions to punish corporations and the people they consider culpable for the destruction of the final scraps of nature's beauty. Now this is a final edition, this isn't a proof. I put makeup on for filming earlier and then I have since worked out, so I look ridiculous and it's flashing red at me, so we're going to have to go fast. But I have read the first 20% of The Woman of Troy, and I have realised since reading this that I have never liked a novel retelling of Greek mythology before. I have liked poetry retellings of Greek myths, but never novels. I read The Song of Achilles, which that video should have gone live by now. Didn't love it, but it is interesting. This book picks up right where The Song of Achilles left off. Okay, apparently this whole video is going to be plagued with Roisin can't be bothered to charge her camera battery. Like I said, I have never before found a novel retelling of a Greek myth that I liked. Didn't love Song of Achilles, don't like Natalie Haynes, didn't like the Penelope ad. This one, so far, we started with Pyrrhus and now we're very much in Briseis' voice. When we started with Pyrrhus, I remembered a lot of people who were talking about The Silence of the Girls, saying that it's called The Silence of the Girls, but it's really still about the men. But we are definitely with the women here. And I do think in part that is because this part of the myth becomes more about the women, or at least there is a lot more source material for the women. The Iliad is very masculine. I mean, a lot of ancient Greece is very masculine. It's a very patriarchal society. We have the Trojan women. We have a lot more mythology that involves the women from Troy and their experience as being captives, enslaved, married off. So yeah, so far I am not 100% loving the writing, but it's all right. Like, it hasn't quite captured me yet. It doesn't have the tone that I like, and I'm interested by that because Pat Barker wrote Regeneration, which I've always said is one of my favourite books, but I read it when I was about 16, 17, and I wonder if maybe my taste in writing has changed, or maybe she wrote this one differently to Regeneration, or maybe I feel like her style of writing suits those men from the First World War more than it suits these women. It is quite slow moving. I feel like there's not a huge amount of plot, and we are very much dwelling on the violence and sexual violence that is a part of war all over the world, but particularly in ancient Greece. And yeah, I feel like I could get into this more than I have so far, but I'm not 100% convinced yet that I love this. Hello. Okay, so I have spent this morning gardening. I've been planting bulbs and cutting back some of the overgrowth. I didn't film much of that. I'll put the couple of clips I did get in here, but I didn't film much of it because it's in my front garden, and partially it's probably not the best to be putting the front of my house on the internet, but also my neighbours can see my front garden and I don't want them to see me film myself. That was honestly more of the motivation. Anyway, so I am now halfway through The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper, and
I feel like it's just okay. And I've been thinking about this because I'm like, the writing is fine. It's not great, but it's not bad either. But I'm not really sure how to talk about what I mean by that. Like, what does bad writing mean? Wrong saying something's bad writing, but then I say, oh, the writing doesn't appeal to me. But it's like, why? What specifically about the writing do I not like? Because I feel like it's important to be specific so that you would know if you thought, I don't want to say it was bad writing and then someone be like, oh, I thought it was good writing. Are you saying something about what I think of writing or for myself? So you would know if it worked for you or not. So the writing, I think, is not particularly lyrical or expressive. There's not a huge amount of description. It is sort of simply stating the facts of what is happening, and it is also stating what every character is feeling, even from the perspective of characters that we are not in. It's also stating them in a very clear, matter-of-fact way, not allowing us to read or infer anything. And on top of that, the plot itself is developing in a way that is fairly predictable. There was a revelation about one of the characters, or a relationship that was happening between two of the characters, and I was like, yeah, but we've known about this since the beginning. Why is it being treated as a big reveal? And I do think it's interesting that Pompeii has been picked, probably because of how well preserved a lot of it was because of the eruption of Vesuvius, which kept all of this graffiti. So graffiti is an important plot point, which I do think is interesting, but mostly I just don't feel particularly invested in any of these characters. And the main character, her motivations, I think that the writer is trying to talk about the nuances and the complexities of being in a situation of being a sex slave, and how you would feel about the person who has enslaved you, and your situation and your relationships with other men who are involved because of the sex trade, or your own personal relationships. I think that that's been an interesting discussion, but I do think it's a little on the nose a lot of the time. And if you've watched any of my vlogs before, you will know that for me, nuance and subtlety is kind of important, and I think it's sort of somewhat lacking here. It's not a book that I will DNF. I'm definitely going to continue reading it and hopefully finishing it today. But at the moment, it's just, I'm intrigued by the plot, so I do want to know what's going to happen and how things are going to go in the end. I have a feeling it's going to be a little bit, like, this isn't a spoiler because I haven't finished it and I won't tell you if I'm right or not, but I have a feeling it's going to be a little unrealistic in the ending, and a good outcome for a plot rather than realistic in terms of what's come before, and feeling integrated. Hello, so I washed my hair last night, and it's still not dry, so we're just going to have to deal with the fact I look a bit like a ragamuffin. So I finished The Wolf Den. It didn't end the way I was predicting it to end, which I suppose is good. It kind of ended quite abruptly, and I also felt like there were a lot of storylines that were like brought to the fore as if something was going to happen with them, some sort of resolution was going to happen, and then they just sort of disappeared or tailed off. It was very strange. I suppose she was trying to avoid what I was complaining about earlier of it being too unrealistic, but it did turn into sort of just a melodrama, and it felt a bit like EastEnders of Pompeii, which not my personal preference. I would say mostly the characters did feel quite well developed and I did enjoy them, and there was a discussion of the nuances of all of the characters, of how they get to the positions that they're in, and of class differences among the Romans, which I thought was quite well explored. I could definitely, the setting was definitely well realised enough for me to feel like I was there and to feel like I could see it, but it didn't feel particularly historical. It felt quite modern, and I don't know if that's a sort of an intentional thing to make you feel like you're there or more immediate, unless a lot of the time with classics we associate sort of 18th century, 19th century poetry with what classics should sound like, and like that doesn't make any more sense than modern translations of Latin, because it would have sounded like Latin, not like 18th century English poetry. And the writing didn't allow any space for you as a reader to read into anything. Everything was very much on the surface, and it was quite melodramatic. It seemed like, oh, whoops, I forgot that I put this in. I now need to wrap it up very quickly because the book is ending. Or there was a bit that was about
this is not a spoiler at all, about them working in a baths, and then for a while they never go back to the baths, and then there's a line about, oh, they stopped going to the baths because Felix didn't think that the tips were good enough, the pay wasn't good enough, so they stopped going. And it's like, oh, you've just remembered that that was the whole plot point of the beginning, and you need to like wrap that up in some way. It needed revision, yeah, in terms of the plot. So I am also halfway through Women of Troy by Pat Barker. I would say that in terms of the writing for this one, again, it doesn't feel very historical, but I think that that is something that you can do with mythology and with this ancient thing, because like I was saying, there isn't a English of the time period, and the phrases and stuff, it wouldn't necessarily make sense or something. You might end up having to explain them, and then that would be even more pointless. Whilst the language is still not particularly poetic or lyrical in any way, it's very plain. I mean, Homer's poetry, his phrasing is quite plain as well, so maybe that has something to do with it. Very accomplished, and like there's nothing missing from it or anything that feels jarring. Like occasionally there's occasionally a little over explanation, but not for the most part. For the most part, it's very clear, and I can see it compared to The Wolf Den, the writing is much stronger. I'm finding it very interesting the way that it's dealing with the myth, because this after effect of Troy is like in ancient Greece and Rome, there were often like several different versions of myths and several different variations that you can see. For like, people know about Medusa, that she was always a Gorgon in the original myth, and then in later myths she was raped in the temple of Athena and turned into Gorgon afterwards. So there are different like perspectives, different versions of different myths. So a lot of what she's doing here is not in the Iliad, and so she's taking from different bits of mythology, and that allows for more like interpreting stuff, and also of putting in stuff of your own, especially because like this is the women of Troy, and the women are often ignored in the myth, and they just sort of disappear off the page, and you're like, well, what happened to them? That's what Pat Barker is able to explore. Interesting reading this directly after the Song of Achilles, because there's a character that dies in the Song of Achilles who is like important in Women in Troy, the Women of Troy. There is a whole like not burying Priam storyline that's going on here, and who's not being buried and he's left, and that's like really bad in ancient Greece, and it's kind of mirroring the Hector thing, but it's also really reminding me of Antigone, and the whole like Antigone wanted to bury her brothers, but Creon, her uncle, wouldn't let her. How she gets punished for that, and there is the similar thing of these women burying a man who was important to them, but who was a traitor to the state that they're currently involved with, and that they're currently in, and so it's not allowed, and the punishment and the burial rites being part of women's. Yeah, it's just reminding me of Antigone. The plot of this book is more reminding me of Antigone than the more Trojan myths that I know. So yeah, I'm enjoying that, but it's still not really gripping me, and I think that I'm not sure why. Maybe when I finished it I'll be able to tell you, but for now I have to go to work. Hello, so I have begun listening to the audiobook of Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. So far it's, again, just okay. I think that the writing is more poetic than the writing of either of the other two that I have finished already, but it feels a little bit like it is trying too hard. Like it is always reaching for a over-the-top synonym when a simple word would work. And I know that I've been complaining about the simplicity of the other ones, and I'm complaining about the poetry of this one, but I think I like books that have beautiful writing but that feels necessary and like integrated into the character, and here it feels a little over the top. So I'm not sure about that. We've gone through quite a lot of plot already, and I do feel like it is being a bit over the top and hitting me over the head with its points as well, because we had the Minotaur, how the Minotaur comes to be, and that was about like a god punishing a man through a woman. So then they started to tell the story of Medusa, and I mean, this is a very persnickety foible, this is a very persnickety point, but they told the myth of Medusa, of her not having been a Gorgon and her having been beautiful and then raped in the temple of Artemis and turned, or was it Athena? I think it was Athena, and turned into a Gorgon. But that's not a Greek myth, that's from Ovid. I think that Ovid is the originator of that myth, that part of the myth. In Greek mythology there were 3 Gorgon sisters who were the children of the Titans, I think. They were the children of some of the Titans, and they were just monstrous from the beginning, but only Medusa turned people to stone. And so if we're in Greek mythology, then they would know the Greek version, not the later Ovidian version from Rome. That is just me being persnickety. It's a retelling of a myth. You can do whatever you want, but the thing is that it was being used to talk about the punishment of women, and I just think it was a bit over the top, and I feel like I am being such a hypocrite here because the poetry that I write is kind of based on this sort of thing. So maybe I should stop being so picky about other people and the way they do it, because I'd probably do it bad. Like if I didn't write my own work, I would probably think it was done badly. I don't know, but I do feel like it's a little overly obvious. I want things to be pulled back a bit and to allow me to have the space to read it, but like I said, only very early days yet. If you've been here, you might notice that the giant pile of cardboard boxes from my corner has gone, but still not completely tidy. Anyway, cup of tea. I've just been on a walk, so I am pretty cold and looking fairly windswept. We were supposed to go swimming as well, but we had a pint at the pub and don't think it's probably best to go swimming under the influence. And after about 4 o'clock, the pool is just filled with children, so trying to avoid those hours. Anyway, I am now halfway through The Magician by Colm Toibin, and this is my favourite one. Out of all the 4 books that I've read, this is my favourite in terms of the writing. I'm really enjoying the style of the writing. It has a lot of like heart, and the characters really feel very realistic and very well realised. I love that we're seeing everything from Thomas Mann's perspective and his perspective on all of the people in his family. I love books about like dysfunctional, weird families, and this weird literary German family in the early 20th century. I'm really enjoying it. I like the way they're kind of adjacent to a lot of the politics, but they're not super involved with any of it, although some people are, but those people are adjacent to the central family. Yeah, I think the writing is so accomplished and lovely. Like it's not like lyrical, but it's really well done. And I always thought, I was kind of thinking about how I seem to be saying that all of the writing is not great. Am I becoming too picky about writing? What is it that I'm really looking for? And then, so like I complained about the strictness of Song of Achilles and the Women of Troy, and then I also complained about the like floweriness of Ariadne. But this is what I want, and this isn't floral at all. It isn't over the top. It feels like every word is purposefully chosen, but lightly chosen at the same time. It's not working too hard, but it is working. So I really enjoy that. There's a bit that I'm a little uncomfortable with, which is Thomas Mann and his reaction to boys, but that's not something Colm Toibin is adding in. Like I've looked it up. I don't know much about Thomas Mann, but that sort of thing was in his diaries, and it is very lightly used. It's not very frequently used. Like one of the boys he's attracted to is 18, and like I don't think that he doesn't do anything with him, so there is no power imbalance there. But there was a weird bit with like an actual child. Not that he did anything. Again, he doesn't do anything, but I do find that uncomfortable to read. But since it actually is part of his life, I don't think it's that weird that Colm Toibin added it. I don't know, I'm just not really sure how I feel about that. But yeah, like I said, the writing, I love it. The family, I love his wife, I love her, Katya. And we're just in the 30s now, so we're getting into the Second World War. He's already in exile because his whole family are leftists. His daughter nearly married Christopher Isherwood, even though she's a lesbian. Christopher Isherwood is gay, and she married Auden instead, who is also gay. So there's a lot of queerness in this novel too, which was part of Thomas Mann's life. Yeah, I'm really enjoying it as a look at the history of that time period. Again, Germany, not something I know a huge amount about, so it's interesting to see it from that perspective. We are going through his life at quite a clip, even though it's like a 400-page novel. It is one man's life during a very tumultuous period of European history, so there is a lot to pack in here. But yeah, I'm enjoying it. I'm also halfway through Ariadne. I'm not loving it, to be perfectly honest. I think that the writing, unlike that, is belaboured and is a little trying too hard and doesn't feel natural or settled into itself. Also, there's a lot of telling stories. Every time we meet a new character, they tell their like mythic background, and it feels really unnecessary. Like we meet Dionysus and he tells us everything that happened. So yeah, I'm halfway through and we're already past the whole Theseus story, so that's interesting that she's like telling more of the myth, which is like, I'm pleased that that is in here. But every single character that gets a whole backstory told, and It just feels unnecessary. And I kind of was thinking about how in Ovid, a lot of the Metamorphoses is characters telling stories. And we go into a story, and then once we're in that story, someone in that story starts telling a story. And I wondered if that's what she was kind of mirroring. But in Ovid, you kind of forget who's telling the story, and then you're slowly drawn out of it again. You forget that you're being told a story by a character in it. I would like it more if it was done in that way, if the story she was telling suddenly seemed to be the main narrative, but she never gets out of the perspective of the character telling a story. So it just becomes very reportage rather than feels like repetitive, and telling rather than showing is definitely a big theme in this. And I don't think it's done particularly skillfully, and so it becomes, yeah, quite dull. Also, all the characters feel very much one note. There's not a lot of depth or nuance to the story that she's telling. We have very clear perspective, and I don't know, I think there could be more nuance in this story. Ariadne is a really interesting story from ancient Greece, and I feel like she's not done it that much justice. Oh, this is not my best day. Hang on, I lost a fight with some French braids. I also have a migraine, so we're going to do this wrap up fairly speedily. I finished both of the books, Ariadne and The Magician. Ariadne I didn't like. The writing, I talked about how like flowery and over the top it felt, and it got even more so towards the end. I felt like parts of the myth were really rushed through, and parts of the myth were not really thoroughly explained. Like, we get into Dionysius and Perseus' war, but it's very like vaguely told to us, and everything kind of comes reported, which I think is another thing that I was complaining about before. We're told a lot of stories about people's backgrounds, and then that kind of comes into what's going on, but it's always being told, because Ariadne is basically on the island of Naxos for the majority of this, not knowing what's going on. And then we have bits that are told from Phaedra's perspective as well. I didn't really like her perspective. I thought that she came across as quite like a petulant child, which, you know, is fine, but there's a lot of myths wrapped into here basically, because there are a lot of myths that surround Ariadne, her family, and the people that she gets involved with, like Theseus and Dionysus. And so the Phaedra myth, well, the Hippolytus myth as it is more probably commonly known. Yeah, I just thought that it was a lot pushed into here, but most things happen off the page, which is very similar to a Greek tragedy, to be perfectly fair to Jennifer Saint, but it just didn't really work for me in the novel form. And I also felt like everything was a bit melodramatic, and like Ariadne being incredibly disgusted by animal sacrifice in ancient Greece, someone being like, oh my god, animal sacrifice, that's the most shocking thing that could happen. She's married to a god. She doesn't feel like she's from Greece. She feels like she's from now. Ancient Greece, I mean. She feels like she's from now, and she's just been put into that time period. It's a similar thing that I had when I read The Book of Longings by Sue Monk Kidd, where we were talking about Jesus' wife, but she was like a modern woman and not at all of her time period. Like, you can make someone be an interesting woman with different perspective, and someone that we can feel, not necessarily relate to, but feel and understand. You don't have to do that whilst removing any semblance of the time period that they're supposed to be from, which I think this did. So yeah, really not my favourite at all. I also finished The Magician, and this one I really did enjoy. Everything I said when I got to halfway through, I feel the same way about the rest of the book. The writing is perfect, I think. Like, I was talking about Pat Barker's Women of Troy, and how some of it was good, but it occasionally over-explained things, or occasionally felt like it didn't have enough to draw me in. This was perfectly readable, perfectly accessible, but also really built the time, and particularly the people, Thomas Mann as a character, but also all the other characters. And yeah, I really have realised that I love like dysfunctional, weird, big families in fiction, possibly because I come from a dysfunctional, weird, big family. So I like relate to it. I really often don't like books about people who are writers or books about books, but I think that Colm Toibin did a really good job of that without making it seem like twee or pandering in any way, which I think a lot of books about books can be. So yeah, this one was definitely my favourite. Out of all of them, I would say probably The Magician on top, and then we have Pat Barker, which was skillfully written, and I did like the story, but it fell a little flat for me, and I think could have been done in a more interesting way. And then probably The Wolf Den I would put below that, because whilst it again felt incredibly modern, which is really annoying, it kind of fit and worked. I was interested in the plot in that one, and then I would put Ariadne at the bottom. And I think possibly this is because I love this myth. Like, I think that this myth could be done really well, and I really wish it had been, but I really didn't like the way it was done here. Best-selling books according to Waterstones in the historical fiction category, books that the UK likes in terms of historical fiction. So it seems like while America loves books about the Second World War and slavery, the UK loves Greek myth retellings, just obsessed with a Greek myth retelling. I am surprised there's no World War II on the list, to be perfectly honest, of the ones that I saw anyway. Maybe it's because this was like their best of historical fiction, but it did say thousands and it was ordered by Bestselling, so hopefully it's not because of that. It's not that they've pulled out the World War II. Maybe it's because the World War II, there's so many of them, so they're kind of, it's hard to get one that really springs to the fore. And you know, we do have Pat Barker, we do have Colm and Toibin, both very famous writers, so they've got that bonus for them. I do think that Ariadne probably had one of the best marketing budgets of last year. I mean, that's just an assumption that I'm making, but I saw it everywhere and it was one of Waterstone's books of the month, so that's part of the marketing, isn't it? So I'm not like an expert on marketing by any means, but I definitely saw it everywhere. So yeah, I had a better time reading this than I did reading the Goodreads Choice Awards, but maybe if I'd tried to read the top 10 I would have a different experience, and maybe if I'd read some of those sequels. I don't think I'm going to want to read another Greek myth retelling for a while. But I do hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them. What sort of vlog would you be interested in seeing? Is there anything, any particular lists you'd like me to read? Any sort of ideas that you think you would like to see from me? See what I'm tackling. I'd love to see what you come up with. I do have a list of things already in my phone, so I'm not starved for ideas, but if there was anything you were interested in seeing, I would love to hear what you have to say. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it and to subscribe. I put out new videos every Thursday and Sunday, so I will see you again very, very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.